So under normal circumstances, we'll be doing the borescope inspection in line with our 400-hour nozzle inspection and clean. So the nozzles would be out. I'm going to remove a nozzle for the purpose of this demonstration. This side panel comes off very easily off the engine, and this will allow access to the first stage compressor, so we can inspect that also. We're now going to pass the scope through the screen and have a look at the first stage compressor. So it's good to look at these from different angles, because if you have any sort of damage, it can be difficult to see if you just look at them from one angle. If you look at them from various angles, you can get a good idea if any of the blades are bent. So we'll just go through and inspect the first stage compressor blades. One word of warning: don't pass through the first stage to start looking at the second stage. There is no repair scheme for any damage on the second stage compressor blades, and Pratt & Whitney do not ask you to look at them. So just concentrate on what you've been asked to look at, which is the first stage compressor blades. There is quite a lot of repairable damage to the compressor blades. They're titanium, they're very hard, very difficult to work with, but if you've got a little small nicks or damage or stone damage, you can remove the screen from the engine and work in there with stones to remove that damage. With the nozzle removed, first thing we can have a look at is the combustion chamber, combustion liner, and just check that for damage, for cracking, for burning, for buckling. Now, if you see damage inside your combustion liner, it could well be caused by bad nozzles, streaking nozzles. So if you see damage in the combustion liner, make sure you check the corresponding nozzles to that damage. So I'm going to put the borescope on record, and we're going to have a quick look at the combustion chamber. So there we go. We're going to poke our borescope inside and just start having a bit of a look around the combustion liner, checking it for damage, checking it for cracks and condition. So now we're going to look at installing the guide tube. This is a bit fiddly and it can take a bit of practice. Just one thing, just don't force it, okay? So as we insert the guide tube, we're inserting it and we're rotating it at the same time, and it should go in like that. Now, because of the way these studs are on this engine, it's going to fall out. So I've made up a little block of foam, which I'm going to place in there, and that's just going to hold it, and now we can do the borescope. So I've got it recording. I'm going to insert the borescope into the guide tube. So we'll go through the guide tube, and then as it comes out, you'll start seeing parts of the engine. So there we go. We're just exiting the guide tube and into the engine. Okay. So we're looking at the small exit duct over here and our stators. So I'll push the scope forward slowly. We can slowly insert this, if I can get it to, there we go. That hitting the blade, there we go. So I'm trying just to insert it very gently into the engine. Taking my time, I'm not forcing anything. We'll just gently push the scope. There we go. Now one thing, just to be don't go past, do not go past this point. If you continue to go round, it's like a bit like a lasso. The fibre scope will actually jam on itself, and then you'll be forced to do a hot section inspection to remove your video scope. So this is as far as you want to go. Now when you get to this point, when you can see the scope, take a photograph, okay? Because then you have evidence that you've done a complete loop. And now we'll start withdrawing the scope. So as we slowly pull back, we can start looking at the blades from the root to the tip, and we'll start looking at segments. We can sort of have a quick look at our segments for tip rub and damage and corrosion. So there we go, and I'm slowly withdrawing. You have much more control as you withdraw the fibre, the scope, rather than pushing it in. You have much more control over it. So here we go, I'm withdrawing it and I'm inspecting and I'm looking for damage. So I'm now starting to have a look at the stator. Now it's quite common to see cracks. They have a lot of stress relieving cracks. And there are limits laid down in the manual about the size and the length and the severity of the cracks. Most of the cracks are acceptable. They don't like cracks which are forming a V, when they talk about pieces that could liberate themselves and go through the engine. That's what they're most concerned about. But cracks are normally acceptable and they're within limits. So I've got a few cracks that I can see right now in the stator. I'm just going to take a picture of those cracks. The reason I'm taking a picture is Pratt & Whitney actually prefer pictures than video. They often can tell more information from them, and they can use the surrounding structure to actually determine how big the cracks are. So when you take a picture of a crack, often take a wide shot so that you can actually get some perspective on what's happening inside the engine, and then you can go in and take a bit more of a detailed shot of the crack. So I started off doing a complete loop of the engine between the stator and the first set of turbine blades, and that gave me a good view of the turbine blades, of the shroud segments, and some of the stator itself. Now I'm going to go in and look between the stator, the CT vanes and the small exit duct, and from that angle I can get a different view. Okay, now I'm unlikely to do a pass of the engine from this angle, and this is where you can count a few segments, a few stator segments, and then remove your guide tube into another nozzle hole and then inspect it again, and methodically go around the whole engine. You should be able to count the numbers of segments you've inspected, then do another section. Guys who do borescopes all the time probably can inspect the entire engine, maybe through 3 or 4 nozzle ports, but this takes practice. If you haven't done this before, go through every single nozzle hole and inspect what you can see. It's good to take your time, look, take photographs and document what you're looking at. Even if there's nothing to see, it's good to take pictures, because what we'd like to be able to see is a trend of the engine over time. So it could be that on the first inspection there's no cracks and you've taken a photograph of that, but then on a subsequent inspection that the crack starts to develop and you've taken a photo, and we can see this progress over various borescopes. We should have lots of evidence. Every 400 hours there's a borescope. If we document the good photos and the bad photos over the life of an engine, we're going to get a really good idea of what's happening. So as we inspect our compressor turbine blades, it's really useful to have another engineer turn the engine really slowly, and then you can see the blades go past and have a good look at each blade, check it for damage, check it for sulfidation, check the tips, tip clearance, tip rub, and just have a really good look. There's no corrosion in the root of the blades, they're a uniform colour, there's no coating loss, and just make sure there's nothing unusual about the blades. So if you want to get a look at the trailing edge of the compressor turbine, you can get your borescope in through the exhaust. It's much easier if the primary exhaust duct is removed, and you can work your way through the power turbine compressor and stator, and then you can get a good view of the trailing edge of the compressor turbine.